Hey there, Tracy. Hey there. Oh, there's Rachel. Hi. Hey, can you hear me okay?
I can, sorry, I was muted.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to figure out why this isn't picking up my.
And thank you. Great. All right. So what I'm going to do here is dive into a topic that I think some of you have heard about and maybe some of you haven't, but it's a topic I get asked to speak about the most these days, which is the Great Reset. And the idea is not to obviously reset just because of COVID, but how you can consistently embrace change, not to do more work. That is absolutely not the goal, in my opinion. It's to do valuable work. And I think everybody is a little, if we're being honest, burned out from change. And the reason why is because change has just exponentially increased and the volume of work has increased. My goal is not to increase the volume. It's to take your time and shift it to things that are more valuable. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about first mindset and then toolkit. That's the cadence typically of how we teach things. We have to change the mindset and behaviors before the toolkit can even stick. So let me just tell you a quick anecdote here around change. So I want you to imagine that there are 10 frogs sitting on a log in the middle of a lake, okay? Now, 5 of those frogs decide to jump into the water. So how many frogs are left on the log? You can hold up your hand and let me know how many you think are left on the log. 10 frogs, 5 decide to jump in. Well, the answer is there are still 10 frogs on the log because deciding to jump in and actually doing it are 2 very different things, right? We all say we want to change, but the action of doing it is very hard because a lot of change is driven by we don't know how. And the second thing is fear. And our jobs as people in HR to build skills, as well as our jobs as leaders, is to minimize that fear and show the mindset that change can be something we want to do. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to use Mentimeter. If you all have your phone, can you do me a favor and go to menti.com on your browser? Menti.com, and I'm going to give you a code to enter so you can start interacting with some poll questions. So menti.com, and enter in this code for me, 5171 3362. Let's talk about how well your teams, right, the group you work with every day, embrace change right now. This is anonymous. And you can say not well, okay, pretty well, and bring it on. No, bring it on. Oh, there is a bring it on. Okay, let's just give a couple more seconds. Okay is in the lead with not well, far behind, not well and pretty well are in the tie. Okay, still in the lead, bring it on, far behind. Okay, so the answers are still going to roll in, but let me tell you, I've already calculated this year. I've done this with over 4,300 people on an online polling. And consistently, the answer is, guess what? Okay. It's always the answer. And the reason for that, I think, is a couple-fold. One is we've been forced to do it. So we have examples, right, of how we've had to change, but that doesn't mean that people want to do it. And that's a very big difference. So what I want to talk about today is the importance of the ability and agility and how that's more important than process and product. Now, that sounds kind of counterintuitive. But the problem right now is so much of us is we default to let's create a better process. Let's just focus on the product. But we don't realize that building the skills of having the ability and an effort to have agility are just as important. It's kind of like me as a speaker. It doesn't matter how great I am on stage, right? I can light up a room, but if everything's virtual, who cares, right? If I'm not agile and have the ability to pivot, none of it mattered. And I think right now you can see how this worked in the pandemic. And there are so many cool examples of organizations that had the ability to be agile, and that's why they were successful. And the question you have to ask yourself is, does your team have this ability too? I mean, take Ford and 3M and GE, and they formed an alliance to help better respond to the medical equipment needs, as well as help alleviate supply chain needs by coordinating with each other and starting to manufacture medical products like, ventilators, air purifiers, face shields. In fact, produced over 6 million of them. Or maybe you've got people like Lyft. I mean, here's an example of an organization where no one is getting in a Lyft or an Uber or a taxi because they're not going into the cities right now. So what they did is they created an alliance, and it was really driven by Dole Foods. And they invited drivers, 120,000 of them signed up, to partner with grocery stores, and grocery stores could call a Lyft driver, and they would deliver groceries to communities that needed it. And then you've got people like, let's talk about telemedicine. I mean, to be honest, and there's a lot of great stats around this too, before the pandemic, very few people were into telemedicine, and there wasn't that much that was available. The amount of people now that do their quote initial visits with doctors online saves them time, saves them money, and helps the doctor do more volume of work. And in the past, you never would have been able to do that. So good things emerge out of this. It forces us to change. But here's the issue. That's not what we want to do. Right? I don't want my team to have a burning platform, like something urgent where we're ready for anything and panicked to be able to respond. I don't want the change put on me. I want to be driving the change I want. And to give you a feeling for that, that's about building the ability within people to not be scared of it. BMW is a really great example of an organization that does this. I could give you a million examples. But what's really cool about this is they have a team, and they don't just have a team that teaches agility, but they have a team that's always thinking about the future. They have an innovation team that's thinking about offbeat partnerships, and they have a team that responds to scenarios for change. And what's interesting about this is for BMW, for example, they realize that their future, because they want to control it, right? They don't want Ford telling them what to do or Audi. They realize that in the future, people might not drive cars, especially in intense city centers. So one of their biggest things is thinking about in the future, maybe we're just going to be about mobility systems, right? Like micro scooters, you've seen all these things around, as well as maybe we're just going to be about renting engine capacity. Now, that's really interesting. The mind shift of these people to build a company around making cars is a manufacturing type of mindset. And you shift to maybe we're about mobility systems. Maybe we're about renting out other people's cars. The biggest partnerships that BMW has right now around the world are with cities, because they realize there are a lot of city centers right now, particularly in Europe, that are saying you cannot drive cars in the city centers. So they want to be the ones in the forefront that will reshape mobility for the millions of people that live in those cities. Or maybe you're like oil and energy companies. Now, this is a shout out to all my friends here in Houston. We teach futuring and foresight at the University of Houston in Clear Lake, which has one of the best foresight and futuring schools. And we teach it a lot to oil and energy companies. One, because they're really good with foresight. I mean, to build an oil rig or to manage a pipeline, these are 50-year horizons. They're not 3-year horizons, right? They're huge. They're multi-billion dollars. There's big risks. There's big investments. Good thing for the oil companies, they have more money than God. So working with them, they realized that there's a few things happening. They realize in the future, they might not extract energy. They probably will grow it. They will harvest it. And a lot of that is being driven through climate change. And a lot of it is just being driven by economies. So what's interesting for Shell, and this is what you really want to take away, is not just being proactive about the future, shaping the future you want, but it's about getting the talent you have to deliver it. So let's imagine that if you're an oil company like Shell, and you really have geoscientists right now. In the future, if you're going to grow energy, you need bioscientists. Those are completely different. There are not enough of them going through the college system right now for them to be able to hire. And that means that their biggest competition for talent going forward will be pharmaceutical companies. You never would have said that 10 years ago. So they want to be the ones that are able to grab the talent, not have to react to it. So being agile is a proactive thing. It shouldn't be a reactive thing, right? We don't want to be on our heels waiting. We want to be driving it. So I want to ask you all then, what is holding you back from, oops, sorry, I could typo there, from change or from being more agile at work? Just type that in. What is holding you back from being able to, I don't know, not have fear around change, being able to be more innovative every day? What's your first thought? Culture. Okay. Fear. I agree. Keep going. Time to think. Okay. Fear, Fessor, that must mean fear. It's hard. Permanent employee, workload, knowledge. Okay, great. Culture. It's interesting. Let's start to look at the themes that people are typing in here. Fear is one. Day job. I've got my workload, day job. I get it. You don't have time to think. And the culture. I want to explore more of the culture. That typically is the number one thing people say, our culture. Now, I will argue that if you're a leader, that's the thing that people are going to say. My boss won't let me do it. I'm the boss. I get that. And I probably won't if I'm the one driving the change. At the same time, I think that people are holding themselves back from it. And there are certain things in our sphere of control that we can embrace change on. So keep entering in your ideas. We'll gather them. But I think what we want to do now is we want to talk about how you're going to do it. In the interest of time, I'm just going to give you 5 things. And my goal here is at the end of this, we can ask questions of each other of how we can change this culture to minimize fear, embrace better priorities, and get people thinking proactively about change. So what you'll see in organizations that actually are trying to build this agility mindset are they have people that are curious about possibilities, not drowning in fear with problems. They challenge not just how they work, the process, but the work they actually are doing. Like we focus too much on process versus what we're doing. We need to prioritize what matters. Like you all just said on that last slide, it's workload. I completely believe you. We need to model the change behaviors. And I have a really interesting provocative shift on what I mean by that. And I think the other thing is setting norms. And that's going to be the biggest one that's going to help you with fear. Fear drives resistance to change. Okay, so let's dive in with each of these. And I'm going to ask you at the end, which one of these 5 is most important to you, either within your team or as a leader, to change within the culture? Which one would have the biggest impact in terms of creating agility? So first of all, let's talk about promoting curiosity. Right? We are taught from a very young age to get answers. And the older we get, we put less emphasis on asking the right questions. And, we can talk about in academia how we have, Socratic discussions, et cetera, but truly we are about testing. And when you get to organizations, you are about shareholder value. No one gets up in the morning for shareholder value. They get up to do meaningful work. They get up to do provocative things. They don't get up to do meetings and emails. So promoting curiosity is how we can get people to solve things better and drive change. Otherwise, you're just receiving the change. And the reason this is important, especially as a tech company, and this is a great quote, actually, that came from the World Economic Forum, asking the right questions in the future is going to be more valuable than finding answers. And I believe that. And here's why. Machines are for answers, people are for questions. And you can get whatever answer you want. Right? You can Google anything and get the answer that you want, but are you asking the right question? And the problem for many of us is we just don't know how. We spend more time brainstorming, but we don't spend time question storming. And the issue with that is if you don't think of the right question, you're not getting the right answer. So let me give you an example of how changing the question can get dramatically different response and answers. You want to wake up people's brains. Too many times, I think that we are so task-oriented that we turn people's brains off, not on, right? Fear shuts us down. We worked with NB Power in Canada, And they're very interesting. They're one of the largest providers of nuclear energy. And what's interesting is they're regulated, right? Nuclear reactors need to work, and they can't just change prices whenever they want. Their big focus is on satisfying their customers. And so what they did is they decided to figure out how they could improve their service and be more efficient. And so the head of the nuclear division actually said, you know what, I'll take this on as a pilot, because if I can do it, and the nuclear division, certainly the other divisions can do it. I don't want all this regulatory stuff to be people's excuse. So we asked people on a Monday, and then he gave them a deadline for Friday. Give me your ideas for how we could be more effective and efficient as an organization. How many answers do you think he got by the end of the week? Effective or efficient? You can type it into the chat, actually. Effective or efficient? How many answers did he get? FYI, he has 800 people on his team. The answer was 12. 12 ideas, which is an abysmal response. So he realized maybe he didn't ask a good question. The next Monday, he said, hey, I still am looking for ideas, and I'd like it to be so how you can be more, you can be more satisfied at work, and we can drive better customer experiences. And what was interesting about that was it talked about what would make them happier, because the EX, employee experience, drives CX, the customer experience. How many responses did he get to that? How you'd be more engaged and drive customer experience. 837 responses. Being able to ask a better question that gets to meaning, right, versus shareholder value, it gets a very different response. You know, there's another one actually that I can tell you about with Starbucks. When Starbucks many years ago was thinking about how they can build their coffee culture, right? And they wanted to have people be able to bring pets nationally. Now, forgive me for the folks that are listening here in Europe, because I know that's so much more part of the culture, but it certainly wasn't in the States. And Starbucks went out, and in a few test areas, they started having people bring dogs. And they realized that they had asked people who owned dogs what experience they wanted in the store. But what they didn't do is ask people who didn't want dogs in the store at all. And they realized that was a really important group to ask, because some customers were a little pissed off. So what they did is they asked customers that said, if you allow dogs in the store, I don't want to go there anymore. And what they got was interesting responses. They said, don't put toys out that make the dog stay, put the bowls outside so it encourages them, owners to actually get them out faster, but it's okay if they're inside. And it completely changed the way that they actually interacted with pets in the stores by changing the question and the audience. So I want you to think about how you ask questions. I bet you don't think about it much. And so if you can really start asking people questions, you will model curiosity. And let me give you some examples about what I mean. So what if you asked people this kind of a question? All right, what's our team biggest time sucks? Why do you do them? How could we eliminate them or improve them? Now, if someone asked me something about time sucks, I would have a lot to say. Or what question, guys, do we really want to ask our clients or our teams, but we're too scared or embarrassed to ask it? That directly addresses fear. And then the last one, hey, if we had to eliminate 25% of what we do every day, right? CEO's walking in right now. He's going to see that we're working on things that don't have value. What are we going to eliminate? Questions like this really turn on the neocortex and make people come up with better answers than who's got an idea. So what I want you to think about, this is kind of your homework coming out of this, and you can do this personally too. What kind of killer question would you love to ask to start modeling curiosity? And it can be anything. All right, let's go to the second one. People that are agile are curious, but they also challenge, not just what they do, but how they work. And one of the interesting things is we tend to follow processes because we think they're efficient. But remember, just because something's organized doesn't mean it's simplified. Those are very different things, right? Anyone here who has kids that have driven sports carpools before know things are organized, but they sure as hell are not simplified, right? There are many different ways that processes get in our way. And the problem with processes, frankly, is a lot of people think consistency means you're in a groove, right? So we don't challenge it. The problem is you might be in a rut. And the problem is a groove and a rut can feel exactly and look exactly the same. So challenging obstacles is important. And even though you've asked people to give you answers to a problem, you might need to go about it a different way. And I want to teach you a little trick that you can do with your team that is based on a concept called cognitive distancing. And this is called impossible to possible. We actually teach a whole course on cognitive distancing. The way you get really inventive solutions is to give your problems away. So you can literally split your team in half, give everybody the same problem. I don't know, improving status meetings. And I want you to write down all the things that are true about those horrible status meetings or whatever problem you're tackling. What are all the things that are true? What are the things that are impossible that we would never change about it? And then you give those impossibles away to another team or another person. And they have to make each impossible possible. And the reason that works is if you try and solve your own problems, you're going to get defensive. I have to do it. It's obligation. We've always done it that way. But when people inherit impossibles, it turns on something called cognitive solutioning. And we want to naturally, as humans, to solve the problem. Let's go to another one and let's talk about prioritizing. I mean, we've talked about curious, we've talked about challenging, but the real problem too is workload, isn't it? And I think we need to be better at having intention around our time. I don't want you to be more productive. I don't want you to have time management. I really hate the gurus that come out and talk about time management. I mean, frankly, if someone came to me right now and said, I want to help you better manage your time, I would be upset. Hey, thanks a lot. I think I do a pretty good job. I just have too much to do. How can I prioritize? So there's a really interesting story that the lead designer, Johnny Ive at Apple told. And he said that the one question that Steve Jobs, and it's a killer question, asked him every day was, what did you say no to today? Now, what I think about is interesting about this is that really struck fear in Johnny Ive. He said, he obviously asked me that because he didn't think I was focused. Why does he not think I'm focused? So every day in the morning, he would ask himself, what am I going to say no to today? And at the end of the day, he would say, what did I say no to today? And if the answer was nothing, he knew he wasn't focused. So, the moral of the story here is tell me what you say yes to, and I'm going to tell you who you are. Because what you say yes to gives people the signal of how they're allowed to use your time. And if you say yes to everything because you feel you're obligated, you have a culture of nice, that's on you. And we've got to be more intentional with our time. I need to do it too. So it will be a really interesting exercise if you want to change this in your culture, your team, to teach people how to say yes with intention and no with purpose. So what is your criteria as a team for saying yes to something? To a meeting, to a report, to a task? And what can you say no to today? That's the first way you can start to get time back and shift it in terms of priorities of meaningful work. Now, the last two things I want to talk to you about are interesting from a leadership perspective. Modeling skills and behaviors means actually focusing on skills, not just outcomes, right? I said at the beginning, agility, right, and ability is just as important, if not greater, than process and product. And the reason for that is, and I'm going to tell you a story of Voss, who's the CEO at Novartis. He really taught me something interesting, and he's changing how people look at strategic visions in companies. Novartis's strategic pillars used to be things like, patient value. What's another one? Products to market, and the final one was shareholder value. Now, you can imagine what it's like to talk about those things in front of people. Shareholder value, yeah. Products to market, yeah. People really weren't getting energized. And so the next year, this was 2 years ago, he said, I'm going to completely change the strategic pillars. I want to talk about what's going to drive those outcomes. The three things at Novartis that everyone needs to be, and everyone knows this, is simplified, curious, and unbossed. Everyone knows it. We want you to be simplified so you can get new products to market. We want you to be curious so you can better help patients. And we want you to be unbossed so you are empowered to do more meaningful work. I'm telling you, that has become a compass within Novartis, and everyone loves it. It is building the skills, not the outcomes. And the final thing I'm going to tell you before I ask you a few questions is, let's talk about fear. Fear is the number one resistor to change, period, for leaders, for CEOs, for anybody. If we as leaders can not just reduce friction, but reduce fear, it'll help us a long way. So, a lot of people say, I'm so nervous about a hybrid work environment or staying virtual, for example. And a lot of people, I said, is why? And the first thing they go into is about process, and they go into about, not being able to be physically with people. What they're talking about is change. But if you set the norms of engagement, people get a lot more comfortable because then they know the guardrails they have to operate in. They don't want to figure it out themselves. So a few norms that I think have been really helpful for people, and this might help you define your norms. Tell people, when do we want to use emails versus meetings versus phones? Right now, email should be for information, meetings is for decisions, phone is for speed. With agendas, rather than actually writing the subject, why don't you write questions in your agendas? That actually makes the person who writes them focus on what they're asking and the people receiving it knowing what they're supposed to do with it. Maybe you're going to set defaults in terms of rather than 60 minutes, 30-minute meetings, right? Go on a time diet. Maybe you're going to start talking about not next steps, which no one listens to anymore, next steps. You're going to talk and agree about the decisions that were made. You're going to change your language. Maybe rather than having so many meetings, you're going to set meeting-free time zones, not just on Fridays, but every day. I know companies now that do not have any meetings before 9:30. People want to start their day with a fresh head. And then finally, another big thing is, because people have a hard time with commitment right now, is rather than setting time on my calendar, I would set office hours. Right? So every Wednesday from 2 to 4, I've got office hours. I'm on a Zoom. Anybody can come onto it and ask me what they need. And it's a lot more efficient than having 50 different meetings on my calendar. So what norms would you set? So here's what I want to ask you, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Where would you focus first if you wanted to be one of these proactively agile companies? Would you be curious? Would you have people challenge obstacles? Would you prioritize, set new skills, or set norms? You can do all 5, but you got to start with one. Which one would you do? All right. What's great about this is the answers are coming in. I can tell a lot about the culture and a lot about the barriers based on this question. If you have a big team, it would be interesting to show them some of this information and see what they say. Typically, there's a big gap between what the leader wants to do and the employees, by the way. All right. So what we have so far, I think we have a big winner. And that might just be because it's easier to do. It's pretty tactical to set norms. Or you think that's the most important thing to get people better interacting and collaborating. So keep sending in your responses. It's interesting. Most people do not start with curiosity. And I think the reason why is because it's a power skill. Again, as identified by the World Economic Forum, it's not a soft skill, it's a power skill. But it takes time for people to see the results. You guys are action-oriented, you are outcome-focused, so I'm not surprised that setting norms is the first thing you said. I'm also not surprised that prioritization is the second. It was very clear that workload was a problem, and being able to prioritize will really help people be able to focus. So let me ask you another question, and this is the last one for you. So we've talked about the Great Reset in just 30 minutes, problems, how other people are doing it, what holds us back, and 5 ways with lots of tactics that we can approach it. What's your biggest thought going through your mind right now? What's your top takeaway as it relates to you, the information, or what it means for the company or your team? Is it, hey, we really are reactive? Or, oh, we're better with change than I thought? We need to start thinking about the future more and having more time to think? What is your takeaway that you would have from the Great Reset? The thing you want to tell your team to start doing right now? Let's wait a second for people to type theirs in. Okay. We need to be more intentional about how we operate. More time to think. Rephrasing, asking the right question. So this is interesting, by the way. asking the right questions, but nobody voted on curiosity. That's what's interesting to me. We still need to prioritize saying it, but yeah, we're like the frogs on the log, right? We got to prioritize. How are we going to do it, right? Curiosity. Yeah. So I think empowering people to say no, that's really great, by the way. Execution is a challenge. Culture need, yes. Okay. So let's talk about that last one, and then I'm going to go into Q&A here. Culture needs to change. I agree. It doesn't matter really how many times you say no if the culture from the top is, I need you to do everything. That's why we actually tell people to try and start things within your sphere of control, within your team, because at least that there's a boss and a leader in the sphere of control where you can get some things started. Empowering people to say no is interesting because that helps with prioritizing. So I think you're going to hear a lot about this in the next year. Now, of course, I'm biased, so I hope you hear about this. It's about using your time with intention. If it's one thing that people have realized through COVID, it's that how much of their time was spent on unnecessary things, right? Because we get in a rut, right? We think we're in a groove. I commute, I go on a train, I drop my kids off, I get them to school, I take a train, I go into Grand Central, I walk across the street, I get my coffee, and then I go upstairs and whoop, it's very organized. So much of it is unnecessary. I use my time that I used to commute now for many more things. All right, I think you see some good themes here in terms of the takeaway. Being intentional, asking questions, prioritizing. Now I want to open it up to you because we just have a few minutes left to discuss. What I'd like to do, and I will give you back these questions, is I'd like to do an AMA. So anyone that gets on Reddit, you know what an AMA is. It's an Ask Me Anything. So I'd like it if you could type in anything that you're curious about. And I'm happy to take the question. I might ask some people in terms of the questions to explain them and have you come off mute and just chime in. So anything about the Great Reset or what's holding you back right now at the organization? I heard workload. I saw fear, which is going to be the number one thing that people need to work on. I saw culture. So we've really got to change the culture. And some of that's top down, but I think we have to start thinking about how do we do it in our sphere of control? Because we can only have intentions within our sphere of control.
Hey, Lisa, it's Tracy. And I know
Hi,
I'm
Tracy.
here as part of the team, helping make this happen with Yvonne and you. But I think I'll put something out there, based on everything that I've seen come in the workshop today. It can seem daunting, honestly, to be that person who's willing to step out and really do something different, truthfully. To be that person, if you're in a C where you need culture to change, or we need people to think or behave differently, how do we really start it, and be the change?
Well, that's where
it's so hard, right? To when you've got such a big thing that you're trying to address. So,
of course,
just interested in your thoughts on that.
So, and I think a few people are saying that, Tracy, thank you for bringing that up, because how do you do it? Like, how do you change culture? I have no reports. How do I change culture within my sphere of control? Well, let me put it in simple terms for people. Culture is not the atmosphere. It's not necessarily the org chart. I believe that culture is the work we do every day. And we need to be able to change the work we do every day and eliminate the unnecessary to make more space for things that we can say or that are better to say yes to. And that's why I spend so much time talking to people about if your boss is one of these people that operates with fear, many bosses do, and they won't let you say no. They're not good at prioritizing. What you can start to do is get rid of, like one of the things I've always talked about is killing stupid rules that bosses get on board with because it saves time and money. When they start to see that you're clearing away the clutter, you're eliminating the noise, you're killing the rules that have outlived their time, the unnecessary rules, not the good rules, they start to get on board. Because one, it makes them look good. 2, it allows them to get rid of the clutter and save money. And 3, it also sends an empowering message without them knowing it, that we're allowed to challenge some of the ways that we work. So that's a tool that you can use to start that also can get the boss on board pretty quickly.
I love that. I love that. I think even too, Lisa, for me, whether you're a leader on this call or maybe you're an individual contributor, it takes a level of courage to step forward and go, I'm going to tee this up. Maybe I'm going to tee it up with my leader, or maybe I'm going to tee it up with my peers and say, I think we can do this differently. I think we can do this better. And here's what I think, and just start the conversation to see if you can influence others
So
to
how
head in this direction. Yeah.
You're 100% right. And I think a few things going through my mind, because this is all culture here. I think everything you're saying, Tracy, you're right, is the vibe of what people are inputting.
Mhm.
First of all, I think that with people that are the change makers, right, they end up being the case studies and the heroes within organizations, but someone had to take a risk, right? When you see people that did that, someone had to take a risk. I think the way to do it is it's this piloting risk. It doesn't have to be a big risk. It's piloting and getting comfortable with it, because people have fear. And the thing that you also have to realize is, for example, when I talk about killing stupid rules or getting rid of, simplifying things and getting rid of unproductive things costs you nothing. And it evokes, in a good way, jealousy in other groups, right? It's contagious.
Yeah.
So at HBO, there's a great woman, Shelley Brindle. Tracy, I don't know if you would have met her. She's one of the thinkers, 50. She's got a great TED Talk. She left her job at HBO and she's now the mayor of a town in New Jersey. And
Awesome.
yeah, she actually started with her team making a list of all the things that they said no to. Other leaders heard about this and they were like, why can't we do that? So then she shared it. She said, hey, this just works for our team, but I'm going to share it with you and you're welcome to copy it. And it became very contagious. So it was kind of a bottom-up thing that she piloted. She was the leader and took a risk, but it was a very low risk. And that might be something that they can try.
I love it. Just willing to take it, and that positive professional competitiveness is a good thing.
It is. It's a little competitiveness, and it's like sticking your neck out in a way that is pretty low risk.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing on here too, I see, Tracy, and I'm glad you brought this up, is people are saying, how can I say no? And I can either get this to you or I'll just make it easy. And give the Future Think email at the end here. We have a tip sheet called 40 Ways to Say No. And what's so funny is we really had no intention of creating this, but we were doing a simplification course and someone said it's so hard culturally to say no. And what everyone realized is saying no is very personal. And it's also, we have the best of intentions of saying no, but sometimes we don't say it the right way. So we came up with this tip sheet of 40 ways to say no. And it's a great way to start getting you comfortable and not be scared at saying no. You can write us and we'll be happy to provide it to you. That'll be easy.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. And they dropped it in the chat. So I know we're getting close to time. Yvonne, I want to turn it over to you because I know we have some great resources from Lisa and team available to our colleagues here at Vontier out on My Learning. It's a great relationship that we have. And I'm talking, Yvonne, I mean, you've done such a great job working with them on this, but I'm talking not only some quick mini learnings that are just to the point. If you get to know Lisa today, she gets to the point. But there's also really detailed guides and aids. So Yvonne, you want to point them to that, because I think
absolutely. Yes. So we have a few options to get more Lisa stuff, I guess, to learn more Lisa stuff. One of them is a free option to all of you that's available now on our My Learning LMS platform. So if you go into My Learning and you specifically look in the Agile folder, there is a course on there and you'll see it right away because it has a picture of Lisa on it. And it walks you through several different modules that talks about the concept of simplification and how that helps us power agility. Lots of different modules that you can take within that, downloadable resources within it as well. And you also have the option to take these little quizzes throughout, which will then, if you successfully pass the quizzes, you can get badged and put it out on your LinkedIn profile, print a cute little certificate, however you want to show it off. But it is extremely helpful and very practical information for sure. Another thing too, as well, is, it was so great to have Lisa on this webinar. She has tons of other topics on webinars like this. She has keynotes like what she did at VLC. She has workshops. And we have actually sat down with her team and gotten a set Vontier rate for all of those wonderful offerings. And so if that is something you're interested in, potentially some of her other topics or things like that, please reach out to me because I would be happy to share that with you. We did share it with some folks in the HR leadership team, so they should have that. But if you want something more specific, feel free just to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to get you that information.
Yvonne, there's one thing here I wanted to mention. Someone actually said, what are the outcomes of these workshops at other companies? I could go on for hours in terms of time saved, money saved, culture impact. The thing about simplicity is there's some very specific ways you can measure it. And I'll provide back to you all the simplification metrics tool that we have with over 60 ways that you can measure it.
I love it. I love that. What I'm doing actually is I'm running a list. I'm keeping a list of all the tools that you've mentioned. And I will get with Rach on your team and
Great.
we will get those and folks on the call, I will figure out a way to get those distributed to all of you.
Amazing. What a great engaged group. I mean, I have to say thank you all because I know the time is very precious. Everyone has ADD and you really stuck it out with me and participated. So thank you for making this so easy for me.
Yeah, great job leading us through this, Lisa, and always engaging. You always are, and just so practical and real. So kudos to Lisa, Rach, and Yvonne. I appreciate you guys bringing this to everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, team. Have a great one.
Thank you.